little bit of where we are in our discussion, because we've been talking about what's the purpose, what are we here for, right? We discussed last time about God and everything that God, from the God aspect of it, and that necessitated that there's some sort of purpose from our perspective. And we said that there was actually two Jewish responses to this question. Number one, pleasure. What kind of pleasure? The ultimate pleasure, right? Lots of pleasure, not just settling for the simple pleasures. And the other answer that we gave is that we are here because God's kingdom, so to speak, is incomplete when it's just Him and Him alone. And what we try to do throughout this series is to try to demonstrate how there is a progression, an ascension of different pleasures, and what Judaism says about every particular pleasure. So we started off at the bottom, ground floor, physical pleasures. Easily attainable, very easily experienced, not so hard to achieve, but also not such lasting pleasure. It kind of goes away once the chocolate bar is finished, the pleasure goes away. And we mentioned that all of the Jewish laws and restrictions about pleasure are all centered on this lower level, basement floor pleasures. Why? So we said a few reasons. Number one, because there's a danger of someone making those pleasures into an ideal, into a focus. And number two, it's because this pleasure is it's a fuel. It's supposed to kickstart you. It's supposed to help you to achieve what really are the ultimate pleasures. So if someone just spends their life making the physical pleasure as a goal, well, then they're playing tennis their whole life. Like the tennis example. Tennis is wonderful, but to play tennis your whole life and to ignore your making a family and having a career and trying to accomplish something, well, that's silly. So there has to be something greater than that. So that's but that's still important because it's something that could be used to help you towards achieving your real goals, which are the higher levels of pleasures. We mentioned that when someone uses simple pleasures in the proper context, what they'll find is that what they're really doing is assuaging the body's need for physical pleasure. Body has needs, soul has needs. We'll get to this a little bit deeper. Body has needs, soul has needs. You want to make sure that the body is in concert with the soul, the soul's goals. Soul has goals. Body has goals as well. You got to make sure the body's happy, or else the body is going to schlep the soul down and prevent it from achieving what it is it wants to achieve. Body and soul are natural antagonists. There's a constant conflict with the body and soul. So you want to make sure that if you want to accomplish your soul's goals, that the body is also taken care of, right? So we assuage the body, we give it some physical pleasure as well. So that's body pleasure. What we're going to be discussing today is, well, what about soul pleasure? Right. We have body pleasure. Now let's talk about soul pleasure. But in between, in the interim, last week we talked about happiness and love. And now happiness, it's kind of less of a body pleasure than physical pleasure. Physical pleasure is something, it's measurable, it's definable. It's something which is more tangible. It's something you could touch, right? It's something you could feel, right? Happiness is kind of a temperament. You might be able to chemically measure it in some way or another, right? You might be able to measure the serotonin and the release of endorphins. That might be somewhat measurable, but it's a little bit more sophisticated. You can't exactly point to one specific reason as to the cause of your happiness. And like we mentioned, the happiness is not caused by any one thing. It's caused by a perspective and an outlook. And if my outlook is one of being positive, of appreciating what I have, if I recognize that I already have more than I could ever achieve, like we demonstrated last week, I already have more than I could ever possibly even want to achieve. I wouldn't give up my vision, as we did this exercise last week. No one would give up their vision for any amount of money in the world. So I already have every amount of money in the world. If I'm not happy with what I have now, getting something else that's inconsequential to what I already have. So if you're not happy now, you'll never be happy in the future. And your life could be full of challenges. You could be riddled with difficulties, with struggles, and you still have more than you could ever achieve. So you still have to be happy now. In your state that you are now, find how your life has value now, and then you can be happy with it. Right? Because if you're not happy now, no matter what you have, no matter what you achieve, you won't be happy then either. But happiness, we'll see, is somewhat of a higher, more sophisticated pleasure than physical pleasure. It's a little bit closer to the soul than it is to the body. It's still somewhat measurable. It's still somewhat tangible. I'm sure there's ways to graph it out. You can still take chemical drug interactions to affect your mood. If someone were to just take a Ritalin every day, they probably will be happy. There is some way to artificially achieve happiness. It's somewhat closer to the body than it is to the soul. Now, love, I don't know if there's any way to do it. I don't know if there's any love potion that would give someone the artificial love without actually doing the work. I don't think there's a way to do it. Love is a little bit closer to the soul pleasure. That it's even further from the body, and that means that it entails more work. Everything that we have to do with our body is much easier than anything we have to do with our soul. So it's more work and more effort, but a greater payout at the end. And this is something that we see in every area of our lives. Things that you work hard to earn have a greater payout. It's something that we all are quite intimately familiar with. If you work hard to achieve a goal, it's something which is more pleasurable for you. It's something which you could take pride in. You look back and you look at when you chronicle your life and your successes. It's something that you cherish greatly. So as we move up the totem pole, we'll see we're getting further away from the body, more esoteric pleasures. And today what we're going to discuss is a soul-only pleasure. Soul-only pleasure. I don't think it has any... the body doesn't... You can't quantify it in body terms. And that's the pleasure of meaning. Pleasure of meaning. Living your life for a cause. Now, this is something that physiologically humans need it. If you're not a human, you're an animal. You're very happy with having your physical needs met. If your physical needs are met, you're a happy camper. If they're not met, well, then you're miserable. And that's just the way the animals work. Humans also, we have physical needs. We have a body, we have physical needs as well. But there could be someone who has every single one of their physical needs met, and they could still be miserable. How could you be miserable if you have all your physical needs met? You have a house, and you have the car, and you have the job, and you have the career, and you still jump off the roof. And I tell you, every day in America, there's someone who has it all. We would call him has it all. Who just last week, I think there was a billionaire who I read about in the paper who jumped off the roof tragically in this New York City penthouse. It's people that are not sick, that are healthy, people that have all the money in the world, have the fancy houses, different houses. People can have everything, have all their physical needs met. And somehow they feel that their life is not worth living. It's a decision that people can make. And this underscores this basic human need that people maybe aren't aware of. And that's the need of the soul to have nourishment. We all know that our body has needs, right? You need to eat, you need to sleep, you need to maybe shower every once in a while, right? Some people do, right? I saw a story about this guy who never showered. He set the world record for most years without showering. Anyhow, as an aside. Something like that. What happens when your body, isn't given what it needs? Right? You're right. You need food, you need drink. If you don't have food, you don't have drink. What do you say? What does your body say? Feed me. Give me something to drink. I need a house. I need shelter. I need clothing. Your body screams out when its needs aren't met.
But one of the fundamental needs is touch. is
Yes, love. I would call it love.
Physical things. It's an emotional thing. If you look at the studies that they have done on children in orphanages, their basic needs are met. They're fed, they're warm, they're in an orphanage, but their emotional needs from a very early age aren't met.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It damages them forever.
When Eisenhower moved into Germany and he found out all these the orphanages where they were having these mechanical babies and all that sort of stuff, he ordered the women, he paid the women to come in and hug these children once or twice a day.
Mm-hmm. And there are tons of studies about this, that people, but this is what I would call love and emotional pleasure. So it's still somewhat easily attainable. But yeah, absolutely. If someone doesn't have love in their life, well, they're lacking a basic need. And I have a somewhat of a sophisticated theory about how someone could actually live without love. Because you find if people have so much meaning, then they actually don't need, they obviate their need for love. It's like, as an example, like in Golda Meir's biography, she writes about how she got married, but she didn't have any room in her heart for love. She was so dedicated to her cause, to Zionism, that she didn't have the ability to experience love. Well, that was her love, but it's not love. When we say love about connecting with other people, like you said touch, or you said hugging, or right, love. That's the pleasure of love, which just means connecting with other people in a deep emotional way. That's something because she had such a large part of her life dedicated to a cause, which is meaning, which is a higher level of pleasure. That's one way to obviate the need for love. So yes, everyone needs love, but it's possible if someone, or it's likely, if someone is so, quote-unquote, married to a cause, well, they won't actually have a need for love. Like, there's a story in the Talmud talking about the need to procreate. We know that procreation, pru urevu, be fruitful and multiply, is the first commandment in the Torah. And it's a responsibility in every individual to procreate. How much do you have to procreate? How many kids you have to have? You have to have a boy and a girl. That's what the Talmud says. It's a boy and a girl. According to one opinion, other opinions, you have to have at least 2 children, because that's the replacement rate. You're a boy and a girl, at least produce a boy and a girl, or maybe just 2 children of either sort. Boy, girl, either one, or boy, girl, right? The replacement rate is actually a little bit more than two children per woman. It's actually about 2.1, because some children don't grow up unfortunately, to have their own children. So therefore, if you want to have a steady population, just no growth and no reduction of population, every woman has to have 2.1 children. So that's what the Talmud says. You have to have 2.2 children, not 2.1 children, but you have to have 2 children to fulfill your responsibility of procreation. What if someone doesn't fulfill their responsibility of procreation? They don't do it. Now, obviously, this is the one thing where someone can't really dictate some people just are, for health reasons or for whatever reasons, are incapable of having children. So they're not liable for something that they have no say in the matter. But let's say someone is perfectly able to have children and they say, I don't want to fulfill this mitzvah. So the Talmud has there's a very interesting disagreement as to how bad is it. According to one opinion, it's like ki'ilu shofatam. This is as if they're murdering, right? They're preventing children from coming as if they're murdering. That's one opinion. Very stringent. Other opinion says as if they're reducing from the glory of God. It means they're taking God's glory and they're reducing it, which is also seems very, very stringent, very strict. Comes along Ben Azai. Ben Azai is the third opinion. He says it's as if they're committing murder. He puts them both together. Bunches them both together. So terrible. It's as if you're committing murder and as if you're reducing from the glory of God. Problem is, this Ben Azai himself wasn't married. And he himself wasn't procreating. So his students said to him, wait a minute. Some people practice what they preach. Some people don't preach and don't practice. But you're preaching and you're not practicing. How could you possibly be the person who says that procreation is so terrible that not only is it as if you're committing murder, it's also as if you're diminishing from the glory of God? You put those two together, those two very stringent on their own merit, reactions to non-procreation. And you're putting them together, and you're the one who never got married? So he utters this famous line, Aval ma'e'eseh shenafshi chashka b'Torah. What can I do? My heart yearns for Torah. What can I do? My heart yearns for Torah. Which means he said that I'm incapable. I have such a love for Torah. Ben Asav is one of the greatest of the Tanaim. I have such a love for Torah that I'm incapable of having any other part of my heart, dedicated to anything else. And what's interesting is that in Jewish law, like Maimonides writes, he says that everyone has responsibility to do procreation. Everyone has responsibility. But if you love Torah as much as Ben Azai did, then you have a jail-free card. Exactly. So this is another example of someone who's so dedicated to their cause, to a life mission, that they're incapable of having love to other people. But I would agree 100% for the 99.999% of us. Yeah, absolutely. It's a basic human need. And like we said, it's a human need. And just like having physical pleasure is a human need, being happy is a human need, having love is a human need, having meaning is as well a human need. Yes?
Yeah. So you got away from this procreation mitzvah if you yearn for Torah. What if one earns to become a U.S. president or CEO of Fortune 500 corporation and goes all out? And for the sake of his career, is incapable of making a meaningful relationship, having a spouse.
Yes, so that's an interesting question. Because we demonstrated, hey, Zionism is very important, and Zionism is a mitzvah, right? Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, to live in Israel is a mitzvah, and to establish a civilization in Israel, that's a mitzvah. But would that mitzvah be enough for her to, as a result of that, neglect a different mitzvah? That's one question. And what you're saying is someone who just wants to, who has an ambition to do something which is not a mitzvah necessarily. I don't know. I don't know if he would be allowed to reject one mitzvah in order to not do.
See that the ambition to be CEO of a company is not the soul serving God. That's serving material wants and ego gratification.
So it's why I selected that example.
Yeah, but I would say that even Golda Meir, even someone who's doing something which is wonderful, maybe remember that's. Is that enough for? I don't know. You have another piece in Talmud. Let me share another piece in Talmud. How the kind of premium the Torah places on procreation. This is in Shabbos, Tractate Shabbos, 31a, and it's talking about someone who dies. Well, not clear if they die, but it says when B'shah shemachnisin adam l'din. I'll just translate it so you guys make your own interpretation as to when it happens. Because at the time when they bring a person into judgment, they asked him 6 questions. What are the 6 questions? Did you do business honestly?
I think it says something like, were you ethical in business?
Were you ethical in business, right? Did you...
have accurate weights and measures or something?
Well, that would be part of doing business. But remember the order here. Did you set aside time for Torah study? Did you study Torah in a sophisticated manner? I don't remember the exact all of them. Oh, did you yearn for salvation? That's 5. That's 4. And one of them is, did you engage in procreation? Means it seems like it's one of these things. Are like, hey, we're trying to address man's life in 6 questions, and one of the things that we'll ask is, did they take the steps to make sure that the war continues after they die? Did they engage in procreation? And what's interesting is that one of the commentators in the back asked the question, wait a minute, some people, for whatever reasons, aren't capable of having children. So he says when it means to engage in procreation, it means not only one's personal children, but that someone try to assist the people around him in either having children or meeting people. He says that if I say, oh, I know this guy, I know this wonderful fellow, I know this lovely girl, maybe they should maybe I should introduce them. That activity is something where someone is taking steps to ensure that the world will continue. Because those things help people meet each other and hopefully have children. How many people here know people or themselves were introduced to their spouse by someone else? I was. Thank you, right? You don't know anyone that was introduced? For sure. This is a common way that people meet their spouses. And it's a lovely thing that someone could do, even if they're not engaging directly in procreation. This is something which they could do to ensure that the world continues.
I thought one was teaching Torah, so that if someone teaches Torah to someone else's kids, it's sort of the same thing as having your own kids. You're spreading the knowledge, the wisdom of Torah.
Well, it says that as well. That's another piece of Talmud that says that if someone teaches someone else's children's Torah, it's as if he bore them, so to speak. But yeah, the point is that I don't remember how we got to this. We got to this by saying that how do we get the procreation? I have no idea.
About having love higher than the need. And I was going to ask a question on that. So when you talk about love, it seems like to give love is a soul pleasure. To receive love is sort of a body pleasure. Like the infants and everything need that. So if someone like...
I think of a body pleasure as something which is body-centric as opposed to love, which is more of an emotional. It's a little bit more detached from the physicality. It's more of an emotional pleasure. It's kind of harder to quantify it. Like I said, it's hard to quantify. And it can't be artificially influenced. Sorry, Vitaly. Apologize.
I just trying to ask a question each time I thought when you stop making your statement. So I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's okay.
Yeah, I just want to ask about altruism.
Altruism.
I wanted to ask about it last time. Mm-hmm. To me, it's very intrinsically connected to love, right? As in, if you love somebody, you totally put... You're saying
if you truly love somebody, you'd probably find them someone nice to marry. Is that what you're saying?
No. If you love somebody...
If you love somebody so much, if you love them so much and you want only their best, you'd find them a nice guy to marry. That's the joke. Well, yeah. You know all your flaws, so why would you want to put that at someone that you actually love?
Suppose somehow you found in yourself to overcome that barrier and still marry that person, despite all your faults. No, but seriously, if don't you derive also certain pleasure from being altruistic?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why people sometimes when they talk about altruism, it's kind of like a circular logic, because you're doing something just for the sake of doing what's right, altruistically, but you kind of feel good from that, so it's not altruistic. That's why it's kind of a does the pleasure of doing something altruistically negate the altruistic nature of that activity?
If you risk your life for something, a stranger to go into that house on fire to get somebody out, there is little pleasure in that until well after your burns will have healed. But additionally, if you don't give it much thought, or if somebody is drowning and you jump into that lake.
I think this is a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about.
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And so we're talking about soul pleasure. Body has an agenda. Body has needs. Body's agenda is not fulfilled. Body says, give me food. I need to sleep. I'm thirsty. Body screams out. Soul, similarly, has an agenda, has needs. And if the soul's needs aren't met, the soul will scream out. And you can have someone who has all their physical needs met. From a physical perspective, they just have it all, and they're still not happy. They still feel like their life has no meaning. And unfortunately, it's something which is very common. I remember when I was first teaching this class about a year ago. I formulated this class. There was a Hollywood director by the name of Tony Scott. Who here remembers Tony Scott? Anybody? Okay, there we go. So this guy, he jumped off a bridge. Remember that? He pulled his car up, stopped on the bridge, and just jumped off. And then everyone said, oh gosh, he jumped off because he found out that he had terminal brain cancer, which turned out to be false. And this guy had it all. He had the house in Malibu, he had the gorgeous wife, he seemed like he had success, He had lots of money. He seemed to have it all. And he still made a decision that his life wasn't worth living for. Once again, we see that there's some people that seem to have it all and still come to that conclusion. They jump to that conclusion. Nice.
Yeah. We're not
And that's it. This should show us clearly that there's something more, and we call it a soul. I think even people that don't believe in souls, they say that there's some sort of need that humans have for meaning. I want to make a book recommendation. Can't recommend this book enough. It's one of the. It was voted like the top 10 books of the past 100 years. So I'm sure y'all have heard of it. Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Viktor Frankl. This is a guy, a psychiatrist, one of the big Viennese psychiatrists who was Jewish. Obviously, all the psychiatrists were Jewish. And he went through the war, and he went through Auschwitz. And he went through the terrible pain and suffering that, what the Jews were experiencing at those times. And he was only there for a year, because I think he was only there for a year. But what he developed is a whole ideology, a whole theory of how man can have meaning even in suffering. If you suffer for a cause, it can also be tremendously meaningful. It can also be nourishment for your soul. Even suffering can be meaning. And it's used as, some people that have difficulties and challenges like we all do. There's ways to try to find meaning in that pain, in that suffering. So, wonderful, fantastic book. But when we say, okay, man needs to have meaning, it could be fulfilled in one of two ways. Either by great accomplishments, right? By living for a cause, by greatness, or by perfection, by completion of a project. What we do this is as follows: if someone lives life for a cause, right, that's tremendous meaning, right? And that cause, I have a list here. It could be ending assimilation in Judaism, finding a cure for cancer, building homeless shelters, combating domestic abuse, promoting communism. 100 years ago, communism was very, very, very popular, especially in the Jewish world. And this was something that people lived for. People dedicated their lives to promoting this way of government. It was huge. And this gave people meaning. But any ism, like it could be Zionism, atheism, socialism, any kind of ism, any kind of life philosophy is something which could be tremendously meaningful for you. And what's ironic about it is that even something as like communism, that kind of history has shown that it's baloney, right? We have enough data to demonstrate that communism is wrong. It's not the right way to have there's no progress in society. Doesn't bring about prosperity. It's wrong. We know that. Still, at its time, it was an ideal that people lived for, and it was able to give them tremendous meaning. Last week, I don't know if anyone here is aware of this, but there was a huge debate, a creation debate. Yeah. You haven't heard about it? Yeah. In this museum in Kentucky, they have a creation museum. So there's this creationist and this evolutionist, and they're pretty sure that they can agree, and they had a huge debate. And it was all over Twitter and all over the news and all over everything. And like millions of people watched it online, and everyone was talking about it. And what I find funny about that is that I don't think that creationism, quote unquote, or believing in God or some higher authority, or the Torah and evolution, I don't see any room for conflict. I don't see why they necessarily are on a collision course. Like, why do you have to be one not the other? Assuming evolution is true, why does that negate God? And assuming God exists, how do we know how God did what he did? It doesn't say in Genesis. Genesis gives us 31 verses about about what God did. It doesn't tell us how God did it. It's possible that he employed evolution. Why does evolution and faith have to necessarily be mutually exclusive? The whole thing is bizarre to me. But anyhow, on Twitter, there were people talking about, there's this whole raging debate and about this, and everyone giving their position, right? And everyone's saying, "Oh, this is a silly debate." There's half the places saying, "Oh, it's so silly because no one's going to change their mind," and now the people saying, "Oh, of course the The evolutionists are silly. Really, man came. Yeah, there was a single-celled organism that produced all of us. Really, right? A mouse over a few million years turned into an elephant. Really, and they're saying, "Oh, creationists. Oh, it's a book of fairy tales." The Bible, everyone's giving their argument, and I got involved as well. But the one point that I was trying to make is that, assuming atheism is correct, assuming it's all random, so we just came here. So there's nothing that guided us to be what we are. Right. Then, as we talked about earlier, all we are is just random amalgamations of atoms. That's all we are. Right. Life cannot have a purpose if there's no cause for that life. Randomness can have a purpose. We know that. So if so, assuming I'm an atheist, it seems illogical for me to get on a mountaintop and start promoting atheism. Because all I'm doing is promoting irrelevance. Right? If God doesn't exist and I'm an atheist, then what I'm really saying is life has no meaning. So if it has no meaning, why do I feel such a need to promote it? Doesn't make sense to promote something when you're promoting something. You're promoting the fact that you're non-existent, or that you have no value. And if you have no value, then you shouldn't be debating. It's like I said, it's like a glass of water and the atoms in the glass of water fighting with each other. I'm better, you're better. Right? It's silly. They're not relevant, right? Atheists get on top of rooftops and scream that we're irrelevant. We're irrelevant. Listen to us. We have no value. We have no meaning. There's no purpose. Listen to us. You're so silly. How come you don't believe what I believe? Because if we believe what you believe, then there's no reason to believe anything. Point being is that atheists also have souls. And atheists also have souls, and their souls also need meaning. Their souls also need to be fed, right? Just like bodies, even bad people need to eat food. Even bad people have souls, and their souls need nourishment. They find their nourishment in promoting their ism, which is atheism. And that could provide them with meaning. And they're living the life for a cause. #atheism. You see that all the time. And that's a cause. That's something they're trying to promote. They're living their life for a goal. And despite the irony in that. They're living their life to promote an ideal, whatever that may be, whatever that is. It's something that they want to spread their message to the world. They want to affect the world. They want to change the world. They want to have meaning. They need it. We all do.
Like, what I feel like I'm hearing you say is that on some level, everybody has to have a meaning, and that whatever they view their meaning for life to be turns into their motivation, and it's what drives.
Well, that's the definition of meaning, is to live your life for something.
Yeah.
To have purpose.
There's theoretical meaning and purpose, and then taking theoretical meaning and purpose and
translating it to action.
Motivation turns that into action.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's whenever those things don't line up, that pleasure gets messed up. Like I think that's kind of the connecting link between our actions and then the resulting soul pleasure or body pleasure. And if those things are not in line with each other and in sync with each other, then the system breaks down. Mm-hmm. And you'll get one type of pleasure but not the other. And you'll choose wrong actions for wrong reasons. Or you'll do right actions for the wrong motive, with the wrong motive, and then not derive the pleasure you theoretically would derive from those actions because you know your intent was wrong.
Who doesn't agree? Yeah, I think that's an excellent job of aligning how the pieces fit together. So that's one kind of pleasure, and that's living for a cause. There's another kind of pleasure, which is living for a project. It could be writing a book, building a business. Building a business is something which is very meaningful. Even though you're not really changing the world if you open up an ice cream shop in Humble, but it's something which is meaningful for you. You're living your life for a cause, right? You hope to finish it, to write a book, right? There's challenges you'll have to overcome, and that gives you tremendous meaning, once you overcome that. Preparing for a marathon or triathlon, people that make fitness as a goal in their life, it could provide meaning because they're living to achieve something for a certain goal. Now, the danger with that is that assuming someone finishes their goal, The difference between living your life for a cause and trying to accomplish something, like a project, to finish a project, is that if you finish writing your book or finish building your business, this quote-unquote existential vacuum goes back, resurfaces. Man has a need for meaning, right? Your soul has needs. Assuming your soul's needs were taken care of by this project that you began, you finish the project, the vacuum returns. Right? Like, it's like the people who finish writing the book and suddenly they need to do something. I know a guy in Houston. This guy is a minority stake owner in the Houston Astros. He did quite well for himself. He was an oil trader. And at the age of 52, he retired with all the money one could ever wish for. And then a year into retirement, he just started up a new business. Now, why do you start a business? To make money. You clearly made a decision. You don't need enough money. You don't need any more money. But what are you going to do? Sit around doing nothing? Someone has a need to be involved in something. That's the need for meaning. If you finish doing what you did, okay, it might feel good. You can live off that pleasure for a couple of months, but you'll need to kick in again. When we talk about philosophy, the great philanthropists, not philosophy, philanthropy, right? Philanthropy, when someone finishes accomplishing their business goals, they move into philanthropy. That's how it works. And people make the big money, right? The billionaire's pledge, right? And what really happens to them, all the people that are so wealthy, they have just such a need for charity. They have just a need for it. Or they have such a predisposition to charity. I think that it's wonderful that people do charity. But I also think that if we were to break it down, what's really happening with them, we'll find out is that they have a need to be involved in something as much as they care about the needs of the people they're helping. Right? Because if you're finished with a project, you'll need to move on to another project. As opposed to if you're living life for a cause, right, you can never achieve that cause. Right? It's possible you'll never be the one to end poverty or to end homelessness or to save the whales or save the trees or stop pollution or global warming or anything like that. Those things are not going away. No matter how much effort, for sure, someone as an individual does, I say even collectively, but still, because you're living for a cause, excuse me, your life has meaning. Now, let's say someone says, I want to be the communist, or I want to be the atheist, right? If you choose the wrong cause, or a cause that could be disproven, or will be disproven, you're in the face of tremendous danger. Why is that? Because let's say you made a decision to be a communist. Now it turns out that the communism is wrong. We know that when we're in an argument, and there comes a point in an argument where we kind of realize that the other guy's right, we still have a hard time admitting it. Why do you have a hard time admitting it? Because you just invested 5 minutes of your life presenting one side of the argument. The other guy happens to be right, but you invest the time, it's very hard to say I was wrong. How much more difficult is it to admit you're wrong, and not only you're wrong, but your whole life and everything that you were living for, everything that gave your life value was wrong? How painful is that? We have an interesting thing about Albert Einstein. If you look at Albert Einstein's career, you'll notice that the major achievements that he had, the major breakthroughs he had, were all at the early part of his life. The last 20 years, he didn't really accomplish anything. All of his papers were written by 1921, and he died in 1955. And it seems bizarre that someone who was able to accomplish so much, towards the end of his life, he kind of faltered a little bit in his accomplishments. So someone once theorized that Einstein was very late to accept the model of the universe, of an expanding universe. He wrote in a letter, I find the idea of an expanding universe to be irritating. He found it irritating, and later on in his life he admitted that he was wrong. But for many years, he had a model which was not in concert, which was not wasn't accurate. And because he had a hard time admitting he was wrong. And that costed him so much, and who knows what kind of achievements in physics he could have accomplished if he admitted that he was wrong. But it's very difficult to admit. We think about someone like Richard Dawkins, who's the face of atheism. Let's say one day he has this epiphany. You know what? It doesn't make any sense, right? It's illogical. Right? It's more plausible, it's more likely that there was some cause to all of this design. Right? It's, and he may, let's say he comes to that intellectual conclusion. Is he going to have the temerity to admit he was wrong? Probably not. Because it's very painful to admit you were wrong. It's very hard, very difficult to admit you were wrong. To admit that all your life was a sham. Everything that you lived, everything you purported, everything that you wrote books about, everything that you were famous for was just wrong. Right?
So painful. I grew up during the waning days of communist socialism.
Yeah.
So the whole generation, people who in the 90s when it all went the whole edifice went crashing down, who were in the 60s, 70s, sometimes 50s, war generation. After war generation, they were said we're communist, our death, nothing would disillusion us of it, disabuse us of that notion, because that's what we believe. So otherwise I thought, what's the alternative? You're 65 and all of a sudden you need that what you believe and what you were taught and what you believe for 40 years.
It's wrong, yeah.
50 years of your life. Now it's totally meaningless. Wrong. So now you're 65, and what's next?
Because it's a lot easier to just live with a mistaken notion than to have to say my whole life was meaningless.
Yeah, that's why in the early 90s when you would go and see on TV or the news, CNN, whatever, all these meetings of communist or party which survived all these tribulations, red flags, the other flags, all the slogans, long live this or long live the other thing, right? So mostly people in the 60s and 70s. It would be hard pressed to find anybody under 40 because they moved on. Now they have some other goals. Now they realize, okay, it's not too late.
Mm-hmm. So, the vast majority of people, right? The vast majority of people, they get married, they have some kids, they work, they punch a clock, they retire, and then they start playing golf, right? They're not Goldie Meir. Are they not? Are they not achieving those higher goals to fulfill their soul? Or is it sufficient? They die happy of a heart attack on the golf course, right? Is it sufficient?
Bonzellas chick, right?
Right. That's right. Or is it sufficient that, they had a couple of kids, they didn't turn out to be sociopaths, right? They had a decent marriage, and that's it.
Well,
Can I comment on that?
yeah, sure.
Rabbi Lappin wrote this great book called The Ten Commandments for Making Money. And one of the things he mentions is that there's no word in Hebrew for retirement, because the whole concept is because a Jew is supposed to live here to serve others. That is what brings us purpose. That's what we have a goal here. And whenever you engage in commerce, you're serving others. So to just save up your acorns in the shelter, and once you have enough to supply yourself, you stop serving others and just live off what you have. It takes away purpose in life, and it's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be engaging in the world.
Are you talking about that book, Thou Shalt Prosper? Or
Yeah.
something like that?
Yeah, maybe, but in my mind, if you were a good man or a good person all your life, exactly, you brought up reasonably well, did reasonably well by a parenting job, you tried to do the right thing all your life, maybe not necessarily always successful, but at least you tried. To me, it's maybe you did something maybe for society at large, maybe a little bit, just a little bit. It's good enough. not everybody can be Albert Einstein, Vladimir Lenin, Adolf Hitler, or somebody. Or shaking. Not everybody
But
can go.
I also
can be-
think that I have two responses to your question. I would say number one is that someone who's just going through life just kind of on autopilot, sometimes they're just busy. They don't actually contemplate, what am I living for? They don't ever actually ask themselves the question, like what am I living for? What difference does it make if I live or die? That's like this kind of question. If you have time to ask yourself the question, then you might find a void. But if someone is just, hey, I'm just, you're always busy, your schedule's full, and and you're doing reasonably well, like you have some level of meaning because you are trying to accomplish some goals. You have a project at work, you have the kids, you have you have the social. So you do have these little micro meanings in your life. That coupled with the fact that you're constantly busy, you don't have time to dwell on these questions. Then yeah, you might be able to go through life without actually having to face any sort of existential questions that we're talking about. I think, yeah, there is a possibility. Do I think that someone like that would maybe not necessarily have the same level of pleasure? Yeah, I think someone might be forfeiting a little bit of the pleasure. And I think even if someone, not a bad ringtone. I think this pleasure, I don't even think it needs to be something spiritual. Like I said, working on a project, building a business, writing a book, all these things are pleasures, but they're not pleasures that are measured in the ways that the pleasure of someone writing a book is not about how much money they're going to make. Someone can write a book and, I don't know, sell, 300 copies, and it's not really impacting their lives economically. But they have some sort of great satisfaction out of that.
Like
Because, well, it's a legacy, but it's also a goal that you set your mind to, and you faced all the struggles that go into writing the book, and you were successful, and you survived, and you thrived, and you accomplished, you persevered. So that's a pleasure that maybe someone who doesn't have set goals won't have. Well, someone does,
But that's not representative of the vast majority of people. Most people don't write books, aren't interested in writing books. Most people don't start businesses. Either they don't have the money or the entrepreneur spirit. They work for someone else. They go in, they do their job for 8 hours a day, and they leave. The vast majority of people are not descriptive of the kind of goals.
So they're not living for any cause? Do you really think that people
They
just
lead lives of quiet desperation, I think is the way one author.
quiet desperation?
Well, it's a cliche like desperation, but using what you just said, micro-accomplishers. Most people are serial micro-accomplishers.
Micro-accomplishers, micro meanings. I'm going to get to you in a second.
We're talking about education and we're talking about other things that, my purpose in life is I have kids, right? And so I have to make sure that they're well taken care of, right? That would be one of the goals that I want to set for me, right? To take care of my kids, my wife, having, all these, or their needs meet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the purpose that I have, right? As a husband and a father. But we also have other meaningful things like, I want to learn more about God and things like that. So those are the spiritual things that, we have to set our goals.
I that would also fall under the micro meanings, because a lot of times the reaction I get to this whole idea is that, oh, I have a wife and kids, and that's true. Because you ask people, what are they doing this all for? What are they working so hard for? Why are they punching the clock, like you said, in a miserable job with a miserable boss? Why are they doing that? Because they kind of need it because they have a family. And the family is one of those goals, one of those life missions that are so important to us. We're willing to forfeit a little bit of, in other areas of our lives because it's important for us. This is what we're kind of living for. We're living for this cause. But I do think that if someone actually goes through the exercise of saying, what am I living for? just ask myself those 5 words. Well, what am I living for? 5 words. 5 words. What am I living for? Right? They have an opportunity to harness this ability to have meaning and to create just this wealth of pleasure that was previously locked out from them. And that's what the Torah wants us. The Torah wants us to live. God wants us to live for meaning, to have something that we're living for, to have something that we're willing to die for.
So why wouldn't family be part of that?
Oh, it would. But I also think
greatest pleasure.
I also think
to sit writing books,
Okay, I
higher than
agree.
the other?
I agree. But what I'm trying to say is that you have to be mindful of that. Sometimes someone who doesn't even know, is not aware about the pleasure that they have, they won't experience it. If someone says, "Oh my gosh, I'm willing to die for my family," that takes their pleasure of meaning and turns on the engine. Right? The mindfulness of the gravity of this pleasure, right, will enable them to actually have the pleasure of meaning and say, "This is something I'm living for. This is my life's purpose. I'm willing to die for this."
But you also have to remember that of your life, different things take on a level of importance.
For sure.
Once
It's
your
going to be
children
dynamic,
are
absolutely.
grown, I mean, when they're
And that's we know the
growing,
empty nester syndrome.
Absolutely, and you really do have more volunteer time.
I think the example that he's pointing out. Sorry, I've got some allergies.
Oh, Lord knows I know.
The example that he's pointing out really puts focus on the idea that the important thing is not always in what we accomplish from the outside. The important thing is on living a life of introspection and self-awareness. Because you've got your guy who dies on the golf course could be one of 2 men. He could be one of those people who lived his whole life just going with the flow of American culture and not being an introspective and self-aware person and searching for meaning and being mindful of the reasons why he's doing the things that he's doing. That guy may die perfectly happy in and of himself, but he lived a 3-foot life when he could have lived a 6-foot life. Like as far as depth of life and experience is concerned. And it's not necessarily our place to pass judgment on the value or worth of that man's 3-foot life, but somebody who's choosing to live a 6-foot deep life might feel sorry for that guy. On the other hand, you could have a guy who dies on the golf course happy, never appeared to accomplish much, but because he went against that kind of cultural flow and chose to cultivate a life of self-awareness and introspection, he went to his job that he hated, and took the money from that and used it to build things that were meaningful and to fund things that were meaningful. And he went to his job that he hated and did his hobbies that didn't seem very impressive, but he used it to bring good things to his family or to raise good children or to come teach classes at temple, things that you don't see and are not lauded as accomplishments. And the reason, from the outside, it looks like one man, but the thing that makes him the shallow man versus the deep man was the fact that he cultivated introspection and self-awareness, which led to meaning and positive outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we get thrown off whenever we use big, flashy examples of accomplishment as this is the man who really did everything great and lived a life of purpose and meaning, and we don't always, and I think this is a symptom of American culture, we don't always value those smaller, more important things. Mm-hmm. And I say this as someone who willingly walked away from potentially meaningful, showy life. I'm an attorney. I got pregnant right as soon as I finished law school. I turned down what could have been a really big and exciting job in favor of staying home with my children. And I don't work, and I'm a stay-at-home mom. And to a lot of people, that's a completely worthless waste of my life. And there are people that women I'm friends with who work and send their kids to daycare, and women that I'm friends with who stay at home and think that education is worthless. So to everyone around me, I've made a bad decision and I'm wrong. And I will probably die without ever having really accomplished something impressive to the world. But I'm raising good children and I'm building my community. And those things are more meaningful in the real world, in the spiritual world, than anything I may accomplish or any money I may make.
And so I think we all agree here that even something that someone is engaging with that doesn't seem to be so, lofty, can still fall into the category of meaning, so long provided as that person is aware of that. Means if someone just doesn't know why they're doing what they're doing, they can't really have any meaning out of it. But if someone says, I know that I'm doing this for my family or for my community, even though it's a small kind of a spectrum, they're not trying to save the world, which is obviously a higher meaning, but still, even on a smaller, on a smaller scale, there could still be value on meaningful value to someone's activities, provided that they're aware of it. But if someone says, "Oh, I'm just going through life and I'm not even asking myself the question," well, then this pleasure is not one that they could experience just yet. So,
and if you save one person, it is as if you have saved the world.
That's correct. Absolutely, that's a statement of the Mishnah. I think that sometimes people, I know people that are irrationally driven to make as much money as they can. And by doing that, they neglect other things in life. And what they're doing essentially is they find meaning in, or they think they find meaning in assembling the largest war chest or largest amount of, right? And and that maybe is meaningful for them, or at least it is able to keep them afloat in the meaning category of life. But we're all familiar about the stockbrokers in 1929 who committed suicide. Like, there's a huge spike in suicide rate. And there's a graph that shows how the suicide rate kind of flows with the economy. And someone whose life has true meaning, you want to make sure that those things that you're engaged with that give you meaning are stuff which are under your control. You don't want to be at the whim of the market. You don't want your life to be at the whim of the market. You don't want your life's value to be dependent on whether or not, the market's up or down. You want to make sure that your life has meaning. Just, you, your family, your life, what you're living for. But if it's connected to something else, well, then stock market goes down, you jump off the roof. Why? Because your life has no more meaning. It's no longer worth living for. That's it. My life was just connected to this one goal. This goal went away. My life has no more meaning. And that's a tremendous danger. And I want to share maybe a story. There's a family in Toronto, very famous Jewish family by the name of the Reichmans. Have you heard of the Reichmans? Enormously wealthy family. At one point, the Reichmans, before their fall, they had a major fall in the 90s. But they built Canary Wharf in London. So think about that. That's like a huge financial center in London. They built it. They owned half of Manhattan. Enormous family. They were worth billions and billions of dollars. Enormously wealthy. And one of the father, he died. And he left his kids two wills. And this one you read right after I die. This one you read after the Shiva. After the Shiva, you read this one. So they open up the first one after he dies, and he said, very, very peculiar request. He said to him, "Listen, I lived a very good life, but I have this one weird desire. That's I want to be buried with my socks." Socks, yeah, like socks. Hosiery. He wants to be buried with his socks. The problem is the Jewish law says that when someone gets buried, they're buried with burial shrouds and not any other clothing. But this is Mr. Reichman who's talking. He has lots of clout, in the community. And he's the one who supports all the institutions. So what do you do? So his children went to the rabbi and to the leader, and he said to him, this is a true story, by the way. I said to him, what do we do? This was his request. You have to honor the request of a dead person, but this is a request which comes in conflict with Jewish law. What do we do? The rabbi says, listen, I know that your father and you guys are big supporters of my institutions. Still, doesn't matter. Law says he's buried without socks, he's buried without socks, irrespective of what he expressly wished for. Fine. So they buried him with tzatz. And 7 days later, they finish the shiva, and they open up the other letter, and he says to them, "You see, my kids, when a person dies, you can't even take your socks with you. Even your socks you can't take with you. You can't. You can't. No matter how much money you assembled in your life, nothing comes with you. You're buried like everyone else, with your burial shrouds, zehu, and that's it. The only thing you really bring with yourself, with you, is your mitzvahs, it's your activities, is what you did for the community, right? Don't get caught up in the trap of trying to just assemble more and more and more money, right? To the exclusion of using your lives, using the blessings the Almighty gave you for good. Because, as we say in the Mishnah says, when a person dies, the only thing that comes with him, right, is his good actions, is what he his mitzvahs, his Torah study, what he did for the community, his kindness, how he treated his family. That's what comes with him. Not his money, not his gold, not his silver, not his real estate, not his Ferraris. None of them comes with them. And this, I think, is germane to our subject because, sometimes people say, "I'm going to live my life for a false meaning." Because money is really a false meaning, right? It could cause someone to jump off the roof when the barger goes down, and it could cause someone to just really live for, what are you living for? What are you're going to die? We're all going to die sometime. And that thought of us going to die sometime could be very useful for us to try to make our life as meaningful as possible. We know that Rosh Hashanah, there's countless, during the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah, there's countless remembrances or references to our own demise, our own death. And Rosh Hashanah is a day of renewal. It seems out of place that we talk so much about our death. And I once theorized is that Rosh Hashanah is a time for renewal, but it's a time to really ask ourselves these important questions. What am I living for? And the way to find out what I'm living for is to ask myself, what is it going to be when I die? What am I willing to die for? On my deathbed, if you imagine your deathbed, if you think about your tombstone inscription, those thoughts are very, very potent. Because when you think about your death, we know death is separation of body and soul. When you think about your death, right, the soul is the one who's thinking. Because death, by definition, means your body is put into the ground and it just disintegrates. So your soul has the clarity of thought. The soul is in the driver's seat, the body takes back seat. So therefore, the soul is able, if you think about what's going to be when I die, you're able to think from the soul's perspective. The body might want to assemble all the money in the world, but that once on your deathbed, that has no value. You can't bring that. You can't bring yourself with you. You can't bring yourself with you.
So one other way that I've read in the past to think about that, and it closely approximates the issue about the meaning, is to think about if you drop dead right now, what would other people say about you? What would your coworkers say? What would your spouse say? What would your child say? How would they remember you in this snapshot of time if you would die right now? And to think about it from that perspective.
I have two ways to say what you're saying. I say, number one, the way to find out what I should live for is to ask myself what I'm willing to die for, which is basically I'm trying to tap into what my existing morals and beliefs and meanings are. So I'm trying to say, what right now am I willing to die for? If I'm willing to die for the community, well, then I should put my focus now. That's what my life goal should be. I should live for that cause that I'm willing to die for. I already have that in high value. Additionally, I can just imagine myself, my own demise, and then my soul could try to formulate what it wants to take with it. So either way, using your own demise, your own death, is a way to make your life more meaningful. I have a quote here. This is a tremendous quote here that from famous speech that Steve Jobs gave in 2005 in Stanford University. And he says exactly, literally, he hit the nail on the head. When I was 17, I'm going to read the quote. I read a quote that went something like, "If you live each day as if it's your last, someday you'll most certainly be right." It made an impression on me, and since then, for the past 33 years, I've looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, what would I want to do what I'm about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know that I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me to make big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you're going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There's no reason not to follow your heart. So you hit the nail on the head. It says, hey, if you think about what's going to be when you're going to die, you have clarity to know what you should live for. You have clarity to know what is the cause that I'm willing to dedicate my life to. And that's what this idea opens up an arena of pleasure for us in the media perspective. Because living your life for a cause is a higher level of pleasure than anything else, than love, than obviously happiness, and anything the physical world could afford you. Living your life for a cause, right? Asking yourself, what am I willing to die for? Figuring out what it is I'm willing to die for, and then living for that goal. Tremendous level of pleasure. Now, as we know, as our algorithm has proven, the higher levels of pleasure, the harder it is to accomplish that said pleasure. So it's a lot easier, for example, to die for a goal than it is to live for a goal. It's a lot easier to make that one decision, to jump in the fire, to save the child, or to jump into the lake to try, to give up your life for a cause. It's very easy. That takes about 5 minutes of heroism, of martyrdom. But to actually live your life through the trenches of just day in, day out, week in, week out, to live for a cause, to truly dedicate your life for something, that's very difficult, very hard. It's. But ultimately, like I said, it has the greatest payout. It's the greatest payout, and it's a pleasure that we could. I think it's highly individual. Everyone has their own way of their own values and their own priorities. But you could take those things that you're already doing right now and find a way to reformulate them to be more meaningful. Right? If you're mindful about those little things in life, those nuisances in life, like your little kids, for example, these little nuisances, or your job, and try to really crystallize why it is you're doing that, it's able to be much more, you're able to bear it. If you have the long picture, like if you have the broad strokes, and I have four children, the oldest one of them is 5, almost 6. Right? I have a lot of chaos in my house, okay, I assure you. But when I'm thinking about the big picture, I'm thinking these kids are going to be my legacy, or part of my legacy. These kids are going to grow up, and they'll have wonderful families of their own, and they'll give me lots of nachas, as we say, right? And therefore, I'm investing now. I'm going through the difficulties now because I have my eye on the big picture, and that's why it can be meaningful for me. Because I know that these kids are going to be tremendous Torah scholars, wonderful people, have wonderful families, and be assets to bringing the world into a better place. I know that. So that makes it something that I'm doing already, makes it more meaningful. And I think our time is up. But I have other examples. But it's something. Yeah. So next week we're in Yom Limud. The week after we're going to have. I'm going to introduce you to something which is even a higher level of pleasure, the highest level of pleasure possible, possibly attained by humans or by anyone for that matter. The ultimate pleasure. What could be more pleasure than living life and meaning? We'll find out in 2 weeks, and we also have we'll have a small little presentation on kosher, and we'll see you all next week. My class at Yom Limud is going to be at like 11, I think, or 11:20, and I hope you guys come. I want to have a big class and make me feel good. Help me with my low self-esteem. Okay, everyone have a wonderful week.